Hello, welcome back to some more reveals from Perils in Paradise. We've got a few since the first set reveal, and I decided to just bundle them all together. Just for warning, there is actually another one that's coming out tonight as I record this, aka Friday. But like every other stream, I'm going to be playing the Elden Ring DLC, so that's going to have to go into the next video, sadly. Also, something I forgot to mention last time, which I guess I'll cover into this one. I mentioned that Marin is now available in the standard set. So again, and Baku, they've been re-added to the core set. So when we evaluate some of these cards, I do have to remember if they're very good with Gen or Baku, then they're going to be better than they otherwise would be. From the week that these cards have been in the set, or they're not quite a full week, but 5 days they've been in the core set. I think there's only one deck that has come out from this even-odd strategy, and it's basically just even Warlock, even Handlock. Seems to be viable. Baku, I don't think any of their decks have been viable. It's kind of weird that they brought these back from Wild into the core set, but not any of the support for odd and even. So this might be a nod to maybe there are going to be some odd and even supporting cards in this set. Who knows? Anyway, let's start off with the card that was revealed just moments before I started recording this. It's Patches! Patches the Pilot! 1 mana, 1/1, Demon Pirate. Battlecry, shuffle 6 parachutes into your deck to summon a 1/1 pirate with charge when drawn. Wow! This is insane! It's kind of like 1 mana 7/7. Okay, it's not truly 1 mana 7/7. You're not guaranteed to draw these pirates, but when you do, that's pretty nasty, right? It's kind of 1 mana, you're going to do 6 damage over time with this minion at some point. It's just will the game last long enough for that. It reminds me of something that's cut from the same cloth as something like Faldiori Strider, where that shuffled 3 ambushes into your deck. You would try and draw through your deck, and when you drew the spiders, you get the 4/4 spiders onto the board. They, though, were 4 mana. I mean, the card itself is 4 mana. You got the 4/4s out of it as well, but you only had 3 in your deck. This is 1 mana. Just 1 mana. And you get 6 within the deck, so... And, not only that, the spiders, they didn't have charge or rush. These have charge, so it's actually really obnoxious. It's a lot of chip damage. I can see this 100% going into an aggro deck, and this being your dream number 1 play. Turn 1, play Patches. Thrilled. It's really funny because people didn't want to draw Patches, the old Patches, that is, the pirate. This one, though, you do want to draw Patches first, so I like the nod to it, but it's kind of the opposite. Anyway, in terms of, cards you're going to be putting into this deck, Demon Hunter has a lot of draw cards, right? It's kind of synonymous with the class. Sigil of Time draws you 3 additional cards. Let's Not Open Spellstone, if you're doing attacking and you're playing this aggro deck, maybe draws you a number of cards. Glaive Tag can do like a full hand refill. Similarly, so can Weight of the Will, depending on the opponent you're playing against. So it's not like Demon Hunter doesn't have a lot of draw. There's also some neutral cards that let you cycle the deck and maybe allow you to get your pilots out earlier. Like, imagine, I know this is a really unlikely situation, but you play your Patches in 1, you draw on turn 2, and let's just say you draw 3 pirates. That is disgusting RNG, firstly. And secondly, disgusting full stop. It's 0 mana, like 3/3. Charging minions onto the board. That is really going to be obnoxious to deal with for some classes. It's also obnoxious for things like Momentum. Again, this is normally seen in more aggressive decks. Because these, when you draw the parachuters, will be spells, which will be like cast when drawn, I assume. I've actually not seen them yet, but I assume it's going to be the text, because it's the text on every other card like this. It's going to take 1 off the cost of momentum every time. So if you go through the streets of your pirates, your momentum might get really cheap, and you could very, very quickly vomit out disgusting damage. The other thing I'll say is, assuming these are spells, which I believe they will be, in that same tone of, cast when drawn, Jotun will be unbelievably good with Patches. Not as an aggressive deck, obviously, if you're going to be playing Jotun. Jotun is a 5 mana 4/5, it's a big tempo down. But if you draw, like, one of these pirates every single turn, and it's your first, draw each turn, you're starting to get 2/2 pirates instead. So you're going to potentially get to, like, 12 pirates. I know that's probably not ever going to be the situation that happens, but getting more value on these pilots is fantastic. One of the issues with Jotun right now, it's a really good card. It just doesn't have the spell support for it. And then there's also this unfortunate situation that the Plague Death Knight deck actually hard rolls it. So maybe Jotun sees a little bit more play. I like Jotun, so I'm happy for it to have some additional support. Next up, this was released earlier in the week. Gorgon Zormu. A 3 mana 3/3 dragon. Battlecry. Get a 2-cost cheese that summons 3 1-cost minions it upgrades each turn. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Astalor of the set. This will be in almost every single deck, I think. It will have, maybe not quite Astalor levels. I've also put on here that it's kind of like Mankrik, which also found its way into a lot of decks. I think it'll be more at the Mankrik play level, which was still really high. This card I just think is phenomenal. Drop this on the board on turn 3. 3 mana 3/3, sure, that's understated, right? You want at least a 3 mana 3/4, and to be honest with you, with standard, you probably want a 3 mana 4/4 if it was to have no other effect on top of it, to even have a chance of seeing any play. It's slightly understated, so be it. You get a 2-cost spell that summons base 3 mana worth of minions. Now, you don't get the battle cry on him, so obviously the weakest play, I think, with this card, but it's still not a terrible play. Is on turn 5, you drop Gorgonzomu and you drop the cheese instantly, and you sort of get like 6 mana worth of stuff. Obviously that's not quite true because Gorgonzomu is probably like half a mana shorter than it, more than it should be. So it's a little bit less than what you'd like, but it's not terrible. However, the real power play of this is you play this on 3. On 4, your cheese upgrades immediately and becomes a 2-cost spell that summons 3 2-cost minions. And suddenly you have a 2-cost spell summoning 6 mana worth of stats. That is disgusting on turn 4, and then you can play another 2-drop with it. And obviously you can just hold this in your hand to later and later and later. And it gets more and more and more threatening. Which is kind of why I've said it's cut from a similar class to Astalor, because Astalor you always have to deal with this 12 damage eventually. Gorgonzomu, if you do not see this cheese early, you're going to have to deal with 3 10-cost minions, which could be a lot of stats. Anyway, here are the cheeses, just in case you're wondering how they work. It is not the number that's summoned that changes, it's literally just the mana cost. Nor does the mana of the card change. It's literally just, you know, it goes from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, all the way up to 10. Anyway, cards that I think this will be good with, or at least, not good with, sorry, comparable with this, I guess, to... Again, just, you know, blow the horn of this card. Ball of Spiders saw a little bit of play, even recently in Standard. That summoned for 3 mana worth of minions. Now, that was used in token hunting decks where they wanted a lot of tokens on the board. Gorgonzomu, if you play the cheese the turn after you play it, so you play it on tempo, like 3 mana, then 4 mana you play the cheese, which only requires 2 of your mana crystals, FYI. You're getting 6 mana worth of stuff. Now, the web spinners were, you know, they had a bit more value inside of them because they death rattle and gave you a random beast, so you kind of pseudo drew a card with it. So I think they're somewhat comparable at that level, but still, Gorgonzomu probably will be a higher roll than that, even. Force of Nature, that gave you 3 2/2 Treants for 5 mana. Gorgonzomu is 2 mana, and the 2/2 Treants are understated for what you would expect for a 2-drop in Standard nowadays. I do appreciate that part of the reason why the mana cost of this is higher is because they are Treants, and that's a more important token, so let's say it's like 4 mana normally to get the 3 2/2s, just base 2/2s. Gorgonzomu is still beating that. Refarm Scheme, do you remember this? It summoned 1/1/1 Imp, which upgraded every turn. Now, obviously, by the time you get to beyond 3 turns, you're getting more minions than Gorgonzomu gave you. However, Refarm Scheme does nothing while it's in your hand. It's just a dead card, just sat there, upgrading. Gorgonzomu, you got the 3 mana 3/3 up front. Like, that's not nothing. It's not a big tempo loss. It's not a dead card in your hand. It is something tangible, something you can trade with, something you can threaten with. Just do not underestimate that. So I think this is better than Refarm Scheme. Also, the imps from Refarm Schemes can never have an effect. They will literally, like, base standard cards. You might high roll these at like 5 and 6 mana, get some really insane death rattles at rush, you might get taunt, lifesteal. Like, you could get some truly disgusting high rolls from this. I've actually not looked through it yet to see if there is like this perfect point. It's probably in like the 9 mana pool or something, or the 9 or 10 mana pool where there will be a more defined series of minions, and if there's one really good one from them, you'll be playing it probably at 9 or 10, or you'll be playing it earlier for the tempo. One or the other. Anyway, again, just to get back into, you know, things that summon 3 cards, Eye of the Storm was 10 mana with 3 Overload that gave you 3 5/6s with Taunt. A 5/6 with Taunt, you could probably say it's like a 4.5 mana minion for Standard. At 5 it would see 0 play. This card saw a little tiny bit of play, not too much, but again, summoning 3 cards normally costs quite a lot. Gorgonzomu doesn't cost a lot, and it comes with the 3/3. The card I'm comparing is probably the most to, but again, I think Gorgonzomu just blasts it out the water, is Rhythm and Roots, where you could have waited for the 4 turns to get the 8/8 giants. The problem with this is kind of what I've alluded to, and why Rhythm and Roots didn't see that much play. You, for 4 mana, do nothing. You skip your turn, and against a lot of decks, you just cannot afford to skip 4 mana on turn 4. So, you know, it goes later and later. You might play it at 7 or 8 instead, by which point your opponent can deal with the cards. Gorgonzola doesn't really have that. If you want to throw it out early when you're playing against an opponent that maybe can deal with the big boards later, you can do that. It's just so flexible. So yeah, I think this will be seeing a lot of play in almost every deck, to be honest with you. Also, as an FYI, it is a battle cry, so you could play it with Shudder Block and get many cheese! You can open up your own cheese stall, like Gorgonzola. And also, we mentioned this on the first episode, Sun Sapu Lanessa. Spells that cost 2 or less, cast twice. Hey, the cheese is 2 or less, so again, if there is some sort of value Paladin deck, which, by the way, Highlander Paladin deck isn't actually giga terrible right now, they might run these 2 cards. They might just slot perfectly into the deck, and you could get a lot of cheese. A lot of cheese. It kind of reminds me a bit about the double battle cry Highlander Excavate Warrior deck, where you would eventually play the treasure and you'll get 5 minions out of it, and that was kind of backbreaking for most decks. If you play Sunsapu Lanessa with a giga buff cheese, you're getting 6 minions that are going to be extremely heavily statted, and that will just break the back of some decks. Obviously, the key will be surviving until that point, but, you know, that threat will always be there. Alright, now on to another minion, and I think this is a very interesting neutral minion. It's Carrion Grub. Obviously, they play on Carrion, as in Carrion, and they're feeding upon corpses. Instead, this is a Carrion Luggage. Get it? Do you get the pun? It's a 4 mana 5/4 beast. Battlecry, get a 1-cost suitcase, pack the top 2 cards of your deck into it. And this is the suitcase, it's a 1 mana spell, which is get another card and another card. Now, I believe, although I've not seen this in action, the Carrion Suitcase will tell you the top 2 cards of your deck. And this is very, very, very important, why I think this card may actually see some play, whereas something like Workshop Janitor is in Tears, which, by the way, was released in the last set, and is just immediately usurped by Carrion Grub. Now, you might be saying, like, how is it usurped? It's kind of the same, right? It's 5 mana, 5/4, because you have to pay the 1 for the suitcase to get the 2 cards out of it. And for 1 less health, you don't have the criteria that you need to control a location as well. That's the big difference. No, it isn't the same at all, because you don't necessarily need to play the Carrion Suitcase. Sometimes the Carrion Suitcase will have 2 cards in it that you don't necessarily want. They may be cards that aren't part of your combo deck if you're a combo deck. They might be cards that are in there for tech cards for certain other decks, and you could just not pay the 1 mana. 4 mana 5/4 beast, that's kind of around the mana cost you'd expect for a 5/4 minion. Obviously, that's not good enough for standard normally. However, it is burning 2 cards from your deck, and if people could run fewer than 30 cards, they would do. So this is kind of like drawing cards without drawing cards. Obviously, if you want the cards, you have to pay the 1 mana surplus. At the very least then, though, it's kind of like you're getting the 4 mana 5/4 with a 1 mana Arcane Intellect. Apologies. That's still really, really, really good. So I actually think Carrion Grub might see some play, especially in classes that might not have access to great drawing tools. So yeah. Just as an FYI, I kind of alluded to this before, this isn't quite the same as drawing, so the card will go into the suitcase from the top of your deck, it won't be drawn into this card, so this won't work with stuff like Jotun, for example, or any other draw effect. It's more like a Discover type dealio. However, if you have any spell synergy, like the Galactic Projection Orb lets you casting spells, then this is another spell for your spell deck, maybe. Alright, now on to another really good neutral. We've just got banger neutrals after banger neutrals right now. The Bumbling Bellhop, an undead pirate, a 3 mana 3/3 with Taunt. Battlecry, if you're holding a spell that costs 5 or more, summon a copy of this. That's really good. Like, if you on turn 3 play 6/6, all taunted, split up in half, worth of stats, that's backbreaking for almost every single aggro deck. Like, if I was an aggro deck, I'd be like, holy shit, I've lost. I have to trade into this, I'm going to cry. incredible card. And I say this, you know, this probably won't make its way into the aggro decks. Maybe it will do, but aggro decks don't want to see like 5 or beyond. They want to be killing you around 5 and 6. So having a spell that costs more than that kind of implies you're never going to play that spell in your aggro deck. So I see this more as a value control type card. I do compare this somewhat to like Bargain Bin Buccaneer, but again, I think Bargain Bin Buccaneer had more chance to be a more aggressive card. Its criteria for getting the copy required you to play another card on that turn, which actually is kind of harder to play than the have a spell in your hand that costs 5 or more. Debatably, now Rogue does have access to 0-cost spells, but it requires you to have the 0-cost spell in your hand, like Bumbling Bellhop requires you to have the 5 or more spell in your hand, so it's kind of a similar criteria, and instead of getting Rush, you get Taunt, but you do get 1 more health stat line. And at the end of the day, if you don't have the 5-cost spell, 3-mana 3/3 Taunt isn't unplayable if you have to play into an aggro matchup because, you know, they're putting too much pressure on you. It's sad times, but not the saddest of sad times. The only downside I've got of this card right now... Oh, and by the way, I think this is more like a Flesh Shaper where the stat line is only slightly under for what you'd want to pay for a 3-mana card. Obviously, Flesh Shaper was more of a 6-mana card. Didn't really see that much play. Saw a little bit of play, but not too much. It saw a bit of play in the Excavate... I don't know, it saw some play in the Highlander Warrior deck before they realized the Excavate package was way better. But yeah, that Flesh Shaper was also a slightly understated minion for its cost. Its condition wasn't too hard to make happen, and you got a copy of it, so... But it's better to get these big swing turns out earlier than later, because if later on people can deal with it easier, so I think Bumbling Bellhop is considerably better than Flesh Shaper. My issue with this card right now is where does it see play? Classes with big spells. Mage has some big spells. Unfortunately, Big Spell Mage right now isn't really a thing, and it hasn't been for quite some time. Also, the big spells right now in Mage normally want to play you minionless, so that doesn't quite work right. Warlock also has some big spells and stuff like Wheel of Death or the control cards, but I don't think Bumbling Bellhop actually makes that list either. So where I think this will actually see some play, and I think legitimately could be okay, is Shaman. Shaman has some big spells like Wish Upon a Star, for example, and we've already been revealed this Cabaret Headliner for reducing the cost of these big spells in your hand. Potentially, maybe, you know, you play a Bumbling Bellhop early to protect the face. If you don't draw it early, you play your Wish Upon a Star, maybe you've discounted it already, that gives these minions stats in your hand buff them, your hand buff Shaman Smile, and then you play it and get a copy maybe of another one of your spells, your big spell Shaman deck, and you're suddenly playing like, you know, 2 5/6s for 3 with Taunt. That's going to be disgusting, so there might be this minion-based big spell Shaman deck out there. We'll have to see the full set though, but watch the space in this card. I think it's kind of low-key pretty good. A card I don't think is particularly good, Customs Enforcer, a 3-mana 2/5 pirate. Enemy cards that didn't start in the deck cost 2 more. It reminds me a lot of Razor Scale. Now, Razor Scale was a symmetric effect. Customs Enforcer isn't. It specifies enemy cards. Problem with Razor Scale, though, is it's so easy to remove. Similarly, Customs Enforcer, it does have 1 additional health. It's still too easy to remove, right? It's not bad for the stat line. You're getting 7 stats for 3 mana. That's like the go-to stat line. But realistically, the effect is more niche than Razor Scale. It would basically require some sort of Excavate meta out there. Now, I will say Excavate Rogue is doing well right now, but I think even Excavate Rogue could deal with Customs Enforcer pretty easily. So I think it's too niche. Maybe it becomes something that techs into some decks if a very specific archetype out there becomes extremely popular, but I think this is going to be pack filler. Speaking of pack filler, Cruise Captain Laura, the legendary card for Druid, a 7-mana 4/5 pirate. Battlecry, summon 2 random locations. We got Travel Agent recently that gave you a discover a location from any class, and now we have Druid just getting random locations as well. I think this card is terrible. I actually think it's legitimately really bad. Reason for this, and we're going to have to go back to the location list. Now, this time without Prison of Yogg-Saron crossed off, because you can get Yogg-Saron. It's not a class location, it's just a random location. And obviously, that is your big role. Now, I have slightly changed this from the last graphic. There are some locations I think that are better in Druid than in other classes. Like Forge of Will, I think, is way better in Druid. They have a lot of big cards. Similarly, the Magical Dollhouse, I think, is better in Druid. I mean, it is a Druid card, so logically it should make sense in that deck. Whereas something like the Crystal Cove I think will be less good in Druid. Just because you're normally playing these bigger boys, you don't really need the additional stat setting to 5/5 for the most part. It still has this issue though that, you know, 3 of the locations are truly terrible. Alright, so let's imagine the ideal scenario. 7 mana 4/5, you get a Prison of Yogg-Saron, and let's say you get a Fairy Tale Forest. Cool. And I've done nothing. You're then relying on randomness from Prison of Yogg-Saron, along with the randomness of the card itself. Okay, let's say we roll the dice and we get Crimson Expanse and Jungle Gym. Oh, I played a 7 mana 4/5 that does nothing. Oh, that's going to happen so often, because again, you don't get to discover, unlike the Travel Agent, whoever it was called. This is random, so you don't get to pick the best cards this time. I will say most of the locations are just solid, good cards. There's some pretty stinky cards in there, though. And when I was looking through it, you would say maybe the average mana cost of a location, we'll say it's around 3. There are some 1 costs in there, but equally there is Prison of Yogg-Saron, pulling it towards the high end. If you're getting 2 3-cost locations, the minion is a 4/5. At the very least, you would want to pay 4 mana for that. Ideally less, though, because it's standard, not arena. So I'm going to say that for 4/5, you'd probably be wanting this to be like a 3 mana card. So the 4 mana excess that you're paying on top of this has to come from the locations. And if you're getting, 2 3-cost locations, you're basically cheating 2 mana on random cards. I don't see it working. Now, we haven't seen all the locations yet, but I think the pool is already so scuffed with all the cards in here that it's just going to make Cruise Captain Laura not consistent enough, and you just won't play it. And I've got to be honest with you, this might be a hot take I'm about to say now. I think if this card was at 5 mana, it wouldn't see any play. Let alone 7, so we'll see what happens with Cruise Captain Laura, but I don't foresee this value random location summoning Druid deck working at all. The card I would say this is most like is Malkorok. Malkorok saw 0 play. A random weapon was just too broad a scope of cards, and more often than not, it's a bad card. Malkorok was a 6/5 as well, by the way. Cruise Captain Laura is a 4/5, so it is severely understated compared to Malkorok, which is an older card, and there's been power creep since then, so I don't think I'd want to be on Laura's cruise. Anyway, that'll do it for reveal number 2. I'll keep doing these, as the cards are released. As we get to the class cards, we'll do a class per episode. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, why not leave a like and subscribe? Everyone helps me out. Let's see you again next time. Bye!